Fuel your curiosity with a digital subscription to National Geographic. It gives you unlimited access to unique perspectives and storytelling, published daily on topics like science, history, animals, and more. Plus, immersive digital-only features and over 130 years of archives. Download the app today and subscribe for just $2.99 a month at natgeo.com/explore. National Geographic. Explore for yourself.
CBD Revolution. The world is discovering CBD and its potential for numerous health benefits. Hemp Fusion Wellness is the premier company looking at CBD with a whole food perspective. For the highest quality CBD oils and products for stress, sleep, energy, and topicals, it's Hemp Fusion. This CBD Revolution highlight has been brought to you by Hemp Fusion Wellness, U.S. trading symbol CBDHF, and in Canada, CBD.U. Web address, hempfusion.com.
The proceeding may contain forward-looking statements which may not be realized.
This is CBS Eye on the World. I'm John Batstra with Anatole Levin of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Commenting on an essay vindicating realist internationalism Anatole has published in response to remarks by two professors, Daniel Dudney and G. John Eikenberry, about liberal internationalism, American efforts and NATO effort in these last 20 years to intervene and reconstruct Afghanistan, Iraq, that it stretches back into the 20th century of Vietnam. We now turn to the powers and what is to be done for liberal internationalism and realist internationalism when it comes to the example of a power for many centuries, perhaps 1,000 years, Russia. Russia just held an election of the Duma, a parliament. And this from the Moscow Times. Half of all the votes cast for the ruling party in Russia's parliamentary elections were likely fraudulent, according to analysis by independent statisticians. The pro-Kremlin United Russia Party won a landslide victory in Russia's State Duma elections over the weekend, securing 324 of the lower chamber's 450 seats, a supermajority that allows them to enact changes to the Constitution. Russia's opposition has alleged massive election fraud. Videos flooded social media during the vote showing apparent ballot stuffing. Questions have also been raised over a significant delay in the publication of online voting results in the capital Moscow, which eventually overhauled the voting lead secured in the offline vote by opposition candidates. I add the additional anecdote that one of the opposition parties doing very well in Moscow, the largest city by far, until the online voting results were posted. One of the parties, the major party, was the Communist Party. It is not your grandfather's Communist Party, but it is understood to be in opposition to the United Russia Party, led by Vladimir Putin and Medvedev, the prime minister. Anatole, I draw on your experience with Russia. The irony of the Communist Party of Russia being the opposition is overwhelming. However, at the same time, what is NATO's place in this quandary of headlines from Moscow? What is the United States' place? Is it, again, to return to the Cold War opposition of the 20th century?
Well, I mean, it's difficult to see what role for NATO or the West there can be in a circumstance where the chief or the most successful opposition to the Putin regime in Russia is communist. That doesn't give us very much of a choice, does it? I mean, I understand perfectly why people are voting communist. The communists have had a kind of license to be an opposition, which Putin has denied to other forces like Navalny. But also to vote for them, of course, it's a vote against regime corruption. But it's also, why people in the West vote for socialist or social democratic parties. A lot of Russians are very unhappy with the condition of state services, pensions, the health service, social welfare, all of that. But the point is that what is our role? We don't have a role. Only a tiny minority of Russian liberals want the United States or the West to have a significant role in Russian domestic politics. I mean, why would they want us to have such a role? We don't have Russia's best interests at heart. We have our own interests at heart, which is fair enough. And Russians have their best interests at heart. This idea that, we can go all over the world, telling people how to vote, telling them, what their political systems should look like, I think is something that we really need to abandon, which of course is not to say that we shouldn't at the same time see and report the truth about what is happening in other countries, such as the fact that this Russian election is quite obviously deeply fraudulent. There can't be any serious doubt about that whatsoever.
And yet the U.S. and NATO and others visit upon the United Russia Party representing Vladimir Putin's party representing the Kremlin sanctions and opposition such as NATO with a rotating combat unit in and around the Baltics and confrontation over Ukraine. There is what appears to be liberal internationalism at work in those instances, or is it?
Well, it's a complicated picture. I mean, the Baltic states are members of NATO. NATO and the United States are legally bound by treaty to protect them. And I strongly support that. If we don't defend NATO allies, then we're finished as a civilization, I would say. But of course, it's a very different matter. Suggesting that NATO or the United States will defend other countries, which in fact it has no intention of defending. There's been all these tremendous language of support for Ukraine, but in fact, when there was a limited conflict between Ukraine and Russia in 2014, just as when there was a limited conflict between Georgia and Russia in 2008, the USA and NATO did not come to the help of those countries, and in fact has no intention of fighting for those countries in future. Of course, because to do so would involve a full-scale war with Russia, a nuclear power, and would basically just open the way for China to dominate the Far East and perhaps ultimately the world. Quite apart, of course, from being a catastrophe for the people of Ukraine itself and Europe and the world in general, leading to an appalling economic crisis. But the thing is, it brings out some of the fundamental, mendacity of Western positions. We talk and talk and talk and talk, but we have no intention of walking the walk. But of course the risk is that, you push a little bit here, you push a little bit there, you make promises that you have no intention of actually keeping, and then, you talk your way into a catastrophe, which to some extent you could say is what happened to the European powers in 1914. Very, very few of them actually wanted a world war, certainly not the kind of world war they got. But they talked themselves into positions from which, in the last resort, they could not withdraw. That's my fear of the US position, both with regard to Russia and with regard to China today.
Vindicating Realist Internationalism is the essay published by Anatole of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft in response to an essay about liberal internationalism, remarks by Daniel Dudney and G. John Eikenberry. This is CBS Eye on the World. I'm John Batchelor.
You're listening to CBS Eye on the World with John Batchelor.